Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Fincher.
This is David Fincher broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,243rd day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. We're counting down to the time our studio is ready. You can still comment during the program by sending me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com, and your email will come up on that monitor right over there. 5 days from today, our new studio will be finished, and you will be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also, don't forget to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Well, there's another victory in the cause of voter ID. Think about it. You need a voter ID, or you need a picture ID for almost everything except, I guess, pay toilets. And last week, there was yet another victory for election integrity. A Pennsylvania district court judge denied a preliminary injunction to stop Pennsylvania's new voter ID law from going into effect. The law, which was passed in March of this year, minimally changes Pennsylvania's election code to require citizens voting in person on Election Day to present voter ID. Acceptable forms of voter ID include IDs issued by the federal or state governments or municipalities, accredited public or private schools, and care facilities. In fact, lots of different places. Citizens who cannot produce an approved form of ID can still cast a provisional ballot, provided that the person delivers proof of identification within 6 days after the election. What could be easier than that? Because this is the same requirements the law requires for casting an absentee ballot. The same ID requirement for absentee ballots is for voting in person. You know, we used to have voter registration cards. I don't know if they still have them anymore, but I remember when I first registered to vote, I had to bring a birth certificate to prove how old I was and that I was an American citizen. So this seems to me to be just going back in the direction of good sense. In addition, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation is required under the law to issue free identification cards for those who cannot afford it. And for those who cannot afford minimal documentation, such as a birth certificate, their votes will still count if they sign an affirmation that they can't afford the cost. How much easier could it be? But of course the challengers, those whose motto is vote early and often, where they bus people from precinct to precinct to precinct to vote, they of course say that many citizens will be disenfranchised or severely burdened by the photo ID requirement. You know, if they don't have a photo ID, there isn't anything they can do in society. You know, they can't get an airplane ticket. They probably can't go on a train, I don't think, in today's America. They certainly can't cash a check. They can't open a bank account, et cetera, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. You can't check in many hotels. I mean, it's ridiculous. And yet, for the most important thing that a citizen can do, or one of the two most important things, vote, he does not have to have a voter ID. Now that's pretty crazy. Fortunately, Judge Robert Simpson, who actually must have read the law and thought a little bit, which is incredible that someone made it to judge without being completely brainwashed, said the challengers had attempted to inflate the numbers of disenfranchised voters, which he estimated was somewhere around 1% and significantly less than the 9% claimed by the petitioners. He also found that the testimony of the petitioner's expert, God knows who that was, probably some sociologist or something, was not credible and demonstrated bias. So that's a win for our side. And what I mean for our side, I don't mean the Democrats or Republicans. I mean for equal voting rights for all Americans. You know, Martin Luther King campaigned against laws that prevented people from voting because he didn't want voting bias. I don't think he would support the people who oppose laws that prevent people from voting multiple times. I mean, I just believe that he wanted everyone to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and the justice and the law is supposed to be blind. Now, I know I forgot at the beginning of the show. I always do this. This is one of those days. So I'm going to remind you that according to the big clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/TaxMageddon countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 130 days, 12 hours, 46 minutes, and 19 seconds. And in a little bit more than 19 seconds, actually rather several minutes, I will return and we're going to talk about Mr. Congressman Akin, who's getting slapped around right, left, and center unfairly. Don't go away. This is David Fincher. I'll be right back. You know, if it weren't for the fact that the Democrats were such absolute scumbags, I could almost be a Republican. The problem is the Republicans are almost as bad. Nevertheless, I have to say that in the dirty tricks, the twisting of words, the taking advantage, taking of unfair advantage, and the general polarization of people, the American Democratic Party is unparalleled, at least since the demise of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. On Wednesday, just yesterday, Mr. Obama, that man who sits in that expensive, very expensive, $65 million a year to run it or something, I think, public housing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, again attacked Representative Todd Akin, the embattled candidate running for Senate from Missouri, as an example of how the Republican Party is antiquated. And, of course, antiquated means you still believe in things like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the rule of law, things like that. And he says, fights we thought were settled 20 or 30 years ago. Well, 20 or 30 years ago, there was a whole lot of science that he didn't know about. There was a whole lot of science that we didn't know about. When I was in high school, when I was in junior high, the smallest possible object was a molecule. Then when I got to high school, we got these things called atoms, and then electrons and protons and neutrons, and now they have quarks and neutrinos and things I sure as heck don't know about. So, Obama, it's a great line that means nothing. But he was speaking at a dinner with all the usual suspects, including basketball legend Michael Jordan, and he ripped Akin and the Republicans for being out of touch. He went on to say, the interesting thing here is that this, and that's a quote, his this, I think that a man has a stutter, but that would be politically incorrect for me to say that. He's just a lousy speaker. Is an individual who sits on the White House Committee on Science and Technology but somehow missed science class. That's what Mr. Obama said. Well, obviously he missed civics class because he has broken virtually we figured out 9 out of the 10 articles of the Bill of Rights, regularly violates the main Constitution itself. He is in no position to complain about someone missing class, because this guy When they were teaching civics, he went instead took a class in revolution, in smoking drugs, in communism, etc. That's his history. And he also said it's representative of the desire to go backwards instead of forwards and fight fights we thought were settled 20 or 30 years ago. Now, he's not just talking about abortion. He's trying to talk about civil rights. If he could, he would invoke the KKK. I'm sure he'll try to figure out a way to bring that in, despite the fact that the Dean of the Senate, Democrat Robert Byrd from North Carolina, now deceased, was a member of the KKK and still, because he had changed his mind, was forgiven by the Democratic Party and became very, very powerful. But Republicans are never forgiven by the Democratic Party or by the mainstream media for anything they say. You know, what's so funny is that Todd Akin's opponent is a flat-out liar who smears people. She rode to election in 2006 by calling W, who I didn't like at all, a murdering racist. Now, he was an idiot. He was an unconstitutionalist. I don't think he was a murdering racist. She said during the campaign, quote, that Bush let people die on rooftops in New Orleans because they were poor and because they were black. Now, can you imagine if that was said, you know, by someone else? If the Republicans had said that about a Democratic president, they would be called on the carpet for dirty campaigning. You know, this was a hideous smear. Why didn't the race card playing McCaskill resign from the race like everyone's calling on Akin to do? Why didn't the Democratic Party call on McCaskill to resign from the race like they're calling on Akin to do? Because it was one of them, and there's two sets of rules. Special rights for special people, which people have to get through their head is what the left, and the Democratic Party is the embodiment of the left in the United States, is all about. Mr. Obama, whose party chairman routinely accuses the GOP of engaging in a war against women, condemns Akin's remarks as ignorant. Rape is rape. Well, that's so profound. A dog is a dog. A cloud is a cloud. And the idea that we should be parsing and qualifying and slicing what types of rape we are talking about doesn't make sense to the American people and certainly doesn't make sense to me. That's because they didn't read, or they either didn't read the entire quote or watch the video. It made perfect sense. The word, as I've said over and over, he should have said forcible. He was talking about actual rape, not some other thing where consent was originally granted and then withdrawn. When a woman is forcibly raped, according to the medical evidence I have seen, and that's been accepted by many, many physicians, as generally accepted, except by these idiots apparently, the female body does try to shut itself down when it's being forcibly violated, and the statistics show it. Something like 0.25% of forcible rapes result in pregnancies, which is what Todd Akin was talking about. Now, rape is okay, though, under certain circumstances. Former President Bill Clinton plans to speak at the Democrat convention in North Carolina. And if you recall, Mr. Clinton was accused of rape by a woman named Juanita Broderick. Dateline NBC aired her allegations against the then Arkansas Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate, but that was okay, because that must have been one of those legitimate rapes that the Democratic Party says doesn't exist. It was legitimate because it was done by Bill Clinton, not by some just theoretical person. Of course, meanwhile, Republican vice presidential contender and messiah of the deluded right, Paul Ryan, acknowledges that he did urged is DC speak for threatened, Missouri Congressman Todd Akin to abandon his Senate bid. He said he had no further plans to speak to him about it now that Akin is staying in the race, meaning Akin told him to shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Ryan told reporters aboard his campaign plane Wednesday that he's proud of his anti-abortion record in the House and has no regrets about sponsoring legislation with Akin to permanently prohibit taxpayer funding from abortion except in cases of incest or, quote, forcible rape, which is the subject that has been misquoted by the media deliberately and the Democrats even more deliberately. Leading Republicans, including presidential candidate Mitt Romney, Snit Romney, and all their super PACs have distanced themselves from Akin after the congressman, after he spoke, because they believe in winning. They believe winning is more important than principle. I've been attacked on Facebook for the same thing. Even to so-called conservatives in the media, they have almost unanimously jumped on the anti-Akin bandwagon, proving that they are too closely tied to the Republican Party, that they are more interested in winning, that that's more important than principle or the truth. Ann Coulter, who bills herself as a Christian, wrote a particularly vicious, evil attack on Akin, which is just way out of the line for someone who talks about how the Democrats are the ungodly and the unchristian. She was certainly ungodly and unchristian in her attacks. You know, it's time for Americans to stop living on 14-second sound bites and start thinking again. You know, you need to stop when these things come up and analyze who's saying what and why. I have no axe to grind here. I say what I think because it's the truth. I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I have no access because I live in Europe, and nor do I want any access in Washington, D.C. or to the Republican Party. I don't want their sponsorship. I don't give a damn whether they like me or not. Most of them are so sleazy I wouldn't let them in my house if they came knocking at my door. When I even was in Washington, I once got a call from someone at the White House, and the rule is you never hang up on someone from the White House. I hung up because the guy was an ass. He was just absolutely someone who was very filled with himself and thought he was important. I didn't think he was so important, and I thought someone ought to break that tradition. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about rape, some more rape on the Democratic side, and what they really think. This is David Fincher. Don't go away. Since the Democrats have chosen to make rape the issue of the day, I thought I'd do a little research and found some more very interesting things about the Democrats and rape. Several Obama supporters in Virginia opposed a popular law that ensures lengthy prison sentences for child rapists. In March, the Virginia state legislature overwhelmingly passed a law that imposed an automatic life sentence for any adult convicted of raping a child under the age of 13. The issue received very little attention and almost no debate, according to Delegate Rob Bell, the bill's sponsor. He said more than half of all rapes in Virginia are to children under 13. He said in the past 2 years we've had 228 offenders. Only 10 got life sentences. The rest were all appallingly short. Now, incredibly, 21 state senators and delegates, all Democrats, every single one of them, including a handful of prominent Obama supporters, voted against the bill. The opponents of the law visited the White House on at least 17 occasions, according to White House logs, and many are organizing for Obama in the very important race to capture Virginia's 13 electoral votes. Senator Louise Lucas, the Obama surrogate who claimed Romney's surge in Virginia was based on racism, was one of them. Delegate Memi Bacote, a leading member of Virginia Women for Obama, and 5 members of the Obama campaign's truth team voted against life sentences for child rapists. Well, I guess that means that Obama doesn't know the meaning of the word truth either. How dare they attack Todd Akin for what he said when it wasn't wrong? It just wasn't the best choice of words. So he's not a wordsmith. He's not Ronald Reagan. We admit that. But then there isn't anybody out there who is Ronald Reagan right now. Maybe Rand Paul might become Ronald Reagan. Maybe there's a Ronald Reagan lying around, Scott Walker in Wisconsin. Who knows? But Obama certainly isn't Ronald Reagan. Obama isn't even John Kennedy. He misspoke. These are people who voted against taking some of the most vile people in the world, child rapists. How sick, how disgusting does someone have to be to engage in that? And they voted against putting them away for the rest of their lives so that they can't ever ruin another child's life. And then they not only attack Todd Akin, but they claim that this is somehow, pro-rape is somehow a policy of every Republican candidate across the country. And like I said, I have no particular interest in defending any Republican unless they're conservative or libertarian. But to brand an entire party as pro-rape and have, when people on Obama's truth team voted basically pro-rape, they voted against really punishing people who rape children, is pretty evil. It's pretty evil. It just shows exactly what this government, this regime in Washington is about. And the fact that the mainstream media is going along with it and not bringing this out. They want to know about everybody's back tax records. They don't want to know about any of Obama's records, but they want to know about Romney's tax records. I'm sure they're going to want to know about Ryan's tax records. I don't like any of the three of them, but at least let's be equally fair or equally unfair to all three. Now, speaking of unfair and evil, the police state may be here. Perhaps we have found the first victim of the NDAA. On August 16th, former Marine Brandon Raub was visited at his home by the FBI and the local police because of supposed complaints, made by unnamed parties, of course, about Brandon's Facebook posts, many of which questioned the conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C., and a few of which may have even suggested violence, but was not a call for violence. I remember when the Communist Party of the United States openly called for the overthrow of the American government, and the American Nazi Party did the same thing, and because of freedom of speech, they were allowed to do it. At best, he suggested violent action, and the explanation that is given is pretty good. According to the Rutherford Institute, which is a legal defense institute and is defending Raub, police and FBI agents did not provide Brandon Raub with a search warrant, but despite that, he was cooperative and agreed to speak with him, probably because he'd been a Marine and was used to following orders from people in uniforms in authority. Without providing any explanation or levying any charges against Brandon Raub or reading him his rights, law enforcement officials handcuffed him and transported him first to police headquarters and then to the John Randolph Medical Center, where he was held against his will. In other words, he was arrested. Now, that's according to John Whitehead, who's the attorney and the founder of the Rutherford Institute. The police chief of Chesterfield County, Thierry Dupois, told the Associated Press that Raub was detained, quote, upon the recommendation of mental health crisis intervention workers. Now, where in the Constitution is the provision for locking someone up for arresting someone on a recommendation? It usually requires a lot of probable cause. It usually, requires a warrant issued on sworn testimony of probable cause, not a recommendation of a mental health crisis worker who could have had 6 hours of touchy-feely training at the local, left-wing community organizer center. But whoever these crisis intervention workers were, and they're unnamed, they considered the Marine sergeant who served honorably in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who, according to Richmond TV, has a clean criminal history and no mental health history. They considered him dangerous, so under Virginia's emergency custody statute, he was grabbed. Now, when we come back, I'll talk more about this story so you have all the facts, and then you can make the decision on whether or not the government's gone too far and NDA has begun. Well, we've been talking about the person who was possibly the first victim of the NDAA, Brandon Raub. He was taken after being arrested to a hearing before a special justice. That worries me because that reminds me of the political courts of the Nazis and the special courts of the KGB and the special courts of all the communist countries. But according to his mother, Catherine Thomas, speaking to Richmond Television, he had an opportunity to share and respond to the questions being asked him about his Facebook posts. Brandon responded and explained himself, and the judge also allowed her to give some facts and basically a character representation of her son, which she did. And then the judge proceeded to read the mental health evaluation that was given on Brandon. The evaluation, which the mother did not hear, but she was told by her son, was 15 minutes long, and basically the evaluator, whoever that was, this again is some unnamed official that I can't find any constitutional warrant for, said that Brandon was not ready to go back into society and he needed additional psychiatric treatment. Well, yeah, that's called brainwashing. Remember The Manchurian Candidate? Remember Clockwork Orange? I realize those are old, but maybe those are movies worth watching because they talk about brainwashing. And certainly, brainwashing can be so simple. In the old days in the movie theaters, when they were using real film, I don't know if they use real film anymore or not, it's been so long, but they would have just one frame that would say popcorn. And even though nobody saw it, they would sell popcorn because people's minds would absorb that. So that was in movie theaters in the United States 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We wonder what is going on in the mental institutions, the government mental institutions today. We know the Soviet Union used them widely, as did other countries in the Soviet bloc, for people who were troublemakers. And so with that, the special justice ordered Brandon's continued detention at a VA hospital for up to 30 more days. And you can bet your butt that in 30 days, they'll come back and ask for 30 more unless Brandon just completely apologizes, and he'll probably be put on drugs. He will be, they'll feed him so full of things that next time he appears in court, he'll barely remember his name. For government officials to not only arrest Brandon Raub for doing nothing more than exercising his First Amendment rights, but actually to force him to undergo psychological evaluations and detain him against his will goes against every constitutional principle this country was founded upon. This should be a wake-up call to everyone who's listening to me or who watches the archives of this show that the police state is here. Brandon Raub is no different from the majority of us who use our private Facebook pages to post a variety of content ranging from song lyrics and political hyperbole, although I usually say that for my radio show, to trash talking their neighbors, friends, and government leaders. And again, I usually do my trash talking about the government here out in the open for everybody. Fortunately, I don't think I can be hauled off to the Veterans Hospital. Indeed, as WTVR noted, Raub's postings, this is a quote, seem no different from those questioning the government's version of the 9/11 attacks or the role of the Federal Reserve. He believes the government is corrupt and ready to fall, which is why he has a home business dealing in silver coins. Well, I don't know if the government had any involvement in 9/11 attacks. I do certainly question the role of the Federal Reserve, and I do believe the government's corrupt and the economy's ready to fail, and I try to have as much silver and gold hidden as I can. In November 2011, a post entitled "The Truth" that that his mother supplied to the TV station bears out these assertions. America has lost itself, Brandon Raub begins. He lays out a positive vision of the United States. This is the land where you can start from the bottom and get to the top. This is the land where, regardless of your race and ethnicity, you can succeed and build a better life for you and your family. This is the land where every race coexists peacefully. This is the land where justice wins. This is the land where liberty dwells. This is the land where freedom reigns. This is the land where we help the poor and people help each other. This is the land where people beat racism. Then he lists those things he believes have sent America down the wrong path. The Federal Reserve, the income tax, the wars and empire building, the systematic dismantling of the Bill of Rights, 9/11, which he called an inside job by the government, in his opinion, and all that followed from it. Politicians beholden to special interests and brainwashed through the Council on Foreign Relations. There is hope, he concluded, but we must take our republic back. In that entire missive, there was not one suggestion of violent revolution. In fact, he very specifically denounced the use of force, and his brother, Brent, told WTVR that Brandon doesn't even own a gun. Now, one could argue that if he really believes that America still are all those things, those wonderful things he said about America, maybe he is demented, because America is no longer the land where you can start from the bottom and get to the top. It is no longer a land where you can succeed regardless of a lot of things. It is not a land where races coexist peaceably. It's certainly not a land where justice wins, as is shown in Brandon's case. Liberty does not dwell there. Liberty weeps. And freedom does not reign. Freedom has been trampled. The poor are being played off against each other. The corporate rich are made richer. And racism is on the increase, but from the black to the white, as opposed to the way it used to be. So, while I love his vision, and he talks about a vision that he's too young to remember Ronald Reagan's America and remember that America, he still believed in it. So I guess if you argue that that makes him crazy, maybe so. Authorities have also released a couple of examples of his posts that suggest violence. At least one of them, quote, "Sharpen my axe, I'm here to sever heads," comes from a rap song. Others were trash talk among his friends playing an online game. According to Raub, speaking to the special justice. What happened to a jury? The posts I read that were supposedly of concern were libertarian posts I see all the time, said the head of the Rutherford Institute, Mr. Whitehead. So why was the FBI investigating run-of-the-mill online speech, and why has Brandon Raub been committed to a psychiatric hospital for a month because of it? Is it a warning to all the rest of us to keep our mouths shut? Because if they can't convict us of a crime, they'll haul us in front of a special justice and declare us insane. That's happened in a lot of countries. Anyone who didn't believe in the ultimate victory of communism or didn't believe in the master race was obviously sick and it needed to be put in a mental institution, if not shot. But their answer is more pat. We received quite a few complaints about what we were perceiving as threatening posts, FBI spokesman Dee Rubinsky told the AP. Given the circumstances with the things that have gone on in the country with some of these mass shootings, it would be horrible for law enforcement not to pay attention to the complaints. Really? Free speech now causes that? Whitehead wasn't buying it. The Rutherford Institute wasn't buying it. He told the AP that some of the posts in question were made on a closed Facebook page that Raub had created, so he questioned anyone, whether anyone from the public could have complained about them. Obviously, it wasn't that. It was the fact that the government is monitoring citizens' private Facebook pages, and at least in Brandon Raub's case, is starting to detain people with whom they disagree. Even worse, those who get on the government's bad side can end up being sent to mental hospitals until they come around to the correct opinions. As Christopher Mannion observed in the LouRockwell.com blog, be sure to reread 1984, especially O'Brien's medicating of Winston in the Ministry of Love and Cancer ward, or Solzhenitsyn's accounts of the psychiatric torture that political prisoners endured under the Soviet system. Fortunately, Brandon's plight has generated a great deal of outrage, not the least by this person who's going to keep talking about it. There is already a Support Brandon Raub Facebook group which has over 8,000 members, which I encourage you to join. Internet commentary about his situation has been overwhelmingly in his favor. Even some who disagree with his statements, including one lifelong progressive with Marxist tendencies at dailykos.com, are disturbed by his treatment. Our views are very strong because we're patriots. Our stance in this family is to question everything. Because of what this speaks to me is that they're trying to shut people up. They're trying to squelch the message. With family, friends, and my listeners, and as much of the public as you can get, on Brandon Raub's side, his message of liberty won't be squelched. Now I have to go away for a few minutes, but I'll be back for another hour. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,243rd day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free and increasingly today much less free America. This is the last couple of days where to comment during the program you're stuck with just sending me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio or emailing me at david@truthandliesradio.com. 5 days from today, starting on Monday, our new studio will be finished, and you'll be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or via Skype from around the world and join the conversation or even pick a fight. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is just about $16 trillion, which is a debt per citizen of almost $51,000 and a debt per taxpayer of almost $140,000, which once again illustrates almost half the people in America are not paying any taxes at all. But all those numbers pale in comparison to the total U.S. debt, when you add it all up, of almost $57 trillion, which means we are talking about 6 years of all of the value of goods and services produced in the entire United States, 100% of all of them, if we were taxed at 100%, before we could pay off all of the debts. America is broke, but no one wants to talk about it, which is sort of an appropriate lead-in for today, because today is Threatening Thursday, where I'm joined by my European co-host via internet, Ollie Neville from the UK, and there isn't much more broke, I guess, than the European Union or the Eurozone. Hello, Ollie.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm all wound up today. I'm pretty angry, actually, at a lot of things, as I guess you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I think you're a little bit wound up as well, so we'll get right into your particular peeve. It's much more than a peeve, but that's not a bad expression in American. I don't know how it comes across in Britain. Julian Assange, who's a little weird, but nevertheless, the president of Ecuador, President Correa, has said that Julian Assange can stay in its London embassy indefinitely. Correa says he shares Assange's fear that from Sweden, Assange could be further extradited to the United States and face charges there. His WikiLeaks website published a barrage of secret army documents and diplomatic cables in 2010 that exposed Washington's power broking around the world. Mr. Assange berated the United States on Sunday from the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy. That must have really burned some people up, where he sought refuge from the arrest, challenging Mr. Obama to end what he called a witch hunt against his whistleblowing website. Speaking from within the London mission to avoid being detained by British police who want to extradite him to Sweden for questioning over what sounds to me like trumped-up rape allegations, Assange said the United States was fighting a war against outlets like WikiLeaks. Well, considering everybody else they're trying to silence, I guess we really shouldn't be surprised about them silencing Assange, should we?
Well, no. I mean, this whole case has really blown up in the last week since I talked about it last time, and it's taken on a whole lot of new turns. There's all lots of new legal evidence come out, people putting forward their opinions as fact, people rebutting those. So it's really, people don't seem to know what's going on. So I've decided, so this week, I just want to sort of try and get a timeline of the events that happened, sort of talk through some of the legal issues, and then people can make their own conclusions, because it's so hard really at the moment to know what's going on, David. It's so confusing.
Well, at least you're going to do what this show is supposed to do, which is to tell the truth and expose the lies. So have at it.
Absolutely fantastic, thank you. Well, before I go into that, one of the worst things that have come from this whole Assange case is the term rape apologist. If you are trying to defend Julian Assange, the people that oppose you don't sort of tackle the issues. They just label you that you think that rape is okay. And I think that's just a small point. That sort of shutting down arguments by using sort of pejorative terms is really a terrible thing to do in the debate today. But anyway, on to Assange himself. What he's alleged to have done in certainly one of the cases is rape. But what he is alleged to have done is not necessarily what he did. So there are lots. The woman allegedly went on several dates with him after the encounter. So it's really quite up in the air at the moment. It's something I'd like to explore quite a lot on today's show.
Okay, and obviously rape is, especially as you explained it before, rape is not necessarily rape, despite what President Obama keeps on saying. So if you'll stay tuned, we'll be back in a few minutes, and we're going to dig deeper into this Julian Assange affair and why the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Sweden want to shut him up and don't want the truth to come out. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, we're back, and it's Threatening Thursday, which means I am joined by Ollie Neville, our European correspondent. And we're talking about what a person who could potentially be the most dangerous man in the world. Not to you and me, but to the big governments and all the lies and the dirty deals that they have made around the world. I know, Ollie, you're not a believer, but you forgive me if I just use one quote from Scripture, for you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting.
Absolutely. This is a big search for the truth, and it's a big, I think, almost it could be seen as a success of government, the way they've turned people on Julian Assange. He used to be this great figure of free speech, and now people that, that should be allying with him against oppressive government regimes are turning on him in mass. So it's really a fantastic smear job. But I mean, it is coming apart at the seams if you push into it. If you really look at the details of what happened, then you can have an informed opinion and realise that he's not this evil man they're presenting him. He is still on the side of the angels, as it were. I mean,
so let's go into some of those facts.
Absolutely. I'm gonna just do a quick timeline of events. Assange was staying in Sweden to give a talk, and he was staying at the house of a woman who is the first alleged victim. Now, she came home early and engaged from the trip she was on, lets Assange continue to stay at her house and has consensual sex with him, later texting her friend that she had a wild weekend with Julian. The next day, after the alleged first rape, she hosts a party for him and turns down other offers to let him stay with other people, saying that he can stay with her. And the day after that, accompanies him to another party, leaves with him, and tells him to stay with her again. Then he goes on. He has consensual sex with a second woman. The first woman knows about this. Again, tells a friend in a text message it's no problem for Assange to live with her, and that she doesn't, even though this friend has offered an alternative. And after that, this is when it starts to get into it. The two women go to the police. The second woman wanted to make not a complaint to the police, but ask a question. The first woman went along as moral support. She wanted to know if she could compel Julian to take an STD test if he wouldn't take one. And the prosecutor then took the comments she made to be a claim of rape and issued an arrest warrant. And she was so concerned when they told her, this is the second woman, that they were going to issue an arrest warrant. She refused to sign the evidence she'd given and refused to give any more testimony, and claimed that she felt, quote, railroaded by the police. The statements were then leaked that night, which you don't do in rape cases, but I'll come on to that. Within 24 hours, the rape accusation had been dropped. Assange then went to the police 10 days later, was interviewed, not arrested, and that interview was leaked, despite him repeatedly asking for assurances that it wouldn't be leaked, it wouldn't be released. The prosecutor, however, still tells him he's free to leave Sweden, and he goes to London. But then suddenly the case gets upgraded, and they release an Interpol red notice arrest warrant. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's an arrest warrant that's usually reserved for terrorists. Bashar al-Assad, the head of Syria, he doesn't have an arrest warrant, a red notice arrest warrant. Gaddafi, at the same time as this happened to Assange, he didn't have a red notice. So this is the Interpol arrest warrant they usually use for high-level terrorists, people at top of Al-Qaeda, and they're using it for Assange, despite him saying that he was willing to come back and face more questions. They've just pushed ahead.
He wasn't sleeping with one of the members of the Swedish royal family, was he?
I don't think so.
Okay, just checking. I thought maybe it was a case of lèse-majesté. Two normal women, and now the U.S. ambassador has said that they would wait to see what would happen in Sweden. They said they don't want him. But actually, there's a great investigative documentary you should watch, Sex, Lies, and Julian Assange. They've got hold of a subpoena from a grand jury which is examining evidence for possible charges. So the US do want him. Despite whatever they say, they want him. They hate him. And, there's all sorts of claims that Julian Assange couldn't be extradited to Sweden couldn't be extradited to the US from Sweden, because it'd be more complicated. That people seem to believe that the state is going to follow its own rules. That for some reason government, which we know lies to us all the time, will follow its own legal set-downs. Sweden, as described by one of its own members of the European Parliament, is the US's lapdog in this case. It illegally renditioned Swedish citizens to Egypt, who were then tortured for the US, breaking all international agreements, breaking Swedish law. The UN investigated and said that Sweden were in the wrong. They will get Assange to the US by hook or by crook if he goes there, where he's unable to claim political asylum. So that's a basic sort of timeline. I now want to go into a few problems with the Swedish case, which just make it look like the whole thing is a setup to get him to Sweden, where he won't face a case because it's so riddled with holes and already damaged by the Swedish prosecutor that it would be thrown out of court immediately. Well, let me just make one point. The U.S. courts have also held that it's legal for the United States authorities to kidnap people from third countries.
Absolutely. I think it's ridiculous of all these people, some of them quite sensible people who distrust the government most of the time, to suddenly, in this case, go, oh, look, they can't possibly extradite Assange to the US because there are all these legal rules. What government ever follows its own legal rules when it's not in its interest? I mean, the whole thing is beyond a joke at the moment. So I'm just going to quote now heavily from a woman named Naomi Wolf. She spent 23 years reporting on global rape law, 5 years supporting women at rape centres, and she is certain, 100% positive, that this case is not being treated as a normal rape or sexual assault case. And she's laid out 8 big points that show that this case is a joke. Firstly, the police never pursue complaints in which there is no indication of consent. She says that police simply won't act on a complaint if there's no indication of a lack of consent or of consent in the face of violence. And his transcripts of the interviews with women are different from any other sex crime. Neither woman has indicated a lack of consent. At one point, one of the victims says she was asleep, in which case it would have been illegal to have sex with her, but her tweets, which she later deleted, show that she was not asleep. She was feeling drowsy, but she consented to the sex. Number 2, police do not let 2 women report an accusation about one man together. The transcripts indicate that the police process the 2 accusers' complaints together. This is unheard of in sex crime procedure. If you do this, it gets huge amounts of contamination between the 2 cases. It's liable to get the whole case thrown out. So, no police would do this in a sensible or normal investigation. Thirdly, the police have taken a testimony from the former boyfriend of one of the accusers, saying that she always used a condom in their relationship. In Sweden, as in most of Europe, there's something called a rape shield law that prevents anyone not involved in the case saying anything to the police, whether it's positive or negative about the prior sexual habits of the complaint. That is illegal. To take that testimony, the police have committed a crime in Sweden. Fourthly, the prosecutors never let the 2 victims have the same lawyer, which they do at the same in this case, because of contamination, again, which could lead to a judge throwing the whole case out. Fifthly, the lawyer himself would never take on 2 alleged rape victims of clients because it would
a conflict of interest.
Absolutely, and it would damage. One case could lead to damage the other. Sixthly, rape victims never use a corporate attorney. If they need a lawyer, they'll use a rape advocate. The police use a criminal attorney. So really, you have to question this instance: who's paying for this? Something like €400 an hour attorney for these women. Who is funding them? That's the real question. There are some more issues further, but I think we're due to have a break soon, David. Am I right?
Yeah, we're just about out of time. One of the points I want to make is, of course, if they get him into the United States, he won't get a trial either because of what WikiLeaks has done. He can be detained under the NDAA indefinitely without ever appearing before a judge, having the right of counsel, the writ of habeas corpus, or anything else. So this man could just disappear. So that's pretty scary. So now we'll be back in a few minutes and we'll have some more things to talk about. Okay, we're back. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio, and it's Threatening Thursday, which means my co-host is Ollie Neville from the United Kingdom. We've lost our internet connection with Ollie, so I'm trying to get that back, but while we're waiting for that, I want to comment a little more on what he was saying about Julian Assange. This is a perfect example of how over the years, when we had good governments, we trusted them. We trusted that they would obey the law. And now there are all of these agreements amongst the governments that allow them to flout the law. For example, the United Kingdom and the United States have a treaty where if the United States wants someone extradited from Great Britain, boom, they just shoot them over without even making a prima facie case in British courts. And, of course, the United States wants Julian Assange. He's not, in many ways, a very likable character. But then, you know, Samuel Adams, one of the American revolutionaries, was not a particularly likable character either. And, you know, he's still one of the founding fathers. It's been a real problem for us to get used to the fact that our governments really are working against us. Okay, I think I finally got Ollie back. Ollie, are you there?
I am. Sorry about that. My internet suddenly died.
Yes,
I do apologize.
That's okay. I was talking about the NDAA and trusting governments. Now, I know you had a couple more points before we move on to the next story, so let's go.
Quick 2 points, 30 seconds each. Seventh point, a rape victim is never encouraged to make any kind of contact with her assailant, and she may never use police to compel her alleged assailant to take medical tests. And that's what the two women, firstly went there to ask Assange to do, and the police asked him to do that. And so, I mean, it just seems quite clear. And finally, the police and prosecutors never leak transcripts during active investigation of rape because they face punishment for doing so, and it could damage the case. And all the transcripts of the complaints in the Assange case have been released, which just seems like an obvious way to sort of smear him. But while they do that, and it seems quite clear that the prosecutors never see this going to trial, they're just going to get him to Sweden and then pass him on to the US. So that's all I've got to say about Assange. Sorry for making today a bit of an Assange fest.
No, that's okay. I think this is an important case, and I think we should keep on following it because the mainstream media is not going to follow it, or at least not follow it truthfully. And that's what Truth and Lies Radio is here for. And if there's something special, we'll even bring you on for a segment sometime earlier in the week if something breaks. So you're our Assange watcher, okay?
Oh, fantastic.
Now,
fantastic.
Another story that Ollie sent me, that when I first saw it, I was thinking, gee, he's supposed to talk about Europe, and this sounds to me like Cuba, because in Cuba, they have something called block chairman, and every block has its block chairman who's responsible for spying and reporting on the activities of everyone who lives in the block. But it turns out that no, when I read the story, we weren't talking about Castro's Cuba. We're talking about the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Town halls have launched an incredible 9,600 spying missions on the public in the past 3 years. The surveillance operations exploit anti-terror laws, but many are targeting really minor offenses such as flouting the smoking ban. Oh my God. You know, dogs pooping in places and dropping litter. Let's call out the SWAT team. Council officers, city councils, town councils, have also gone undercover, or police officers, I guess, have gone undercover to carry out test purchases at local escort agencies, it was revealed last night. In other cases, tactics included obtaining phone records and trapping householders putting out rubbish early by using motion-activated cameras on lampposts and inside tin cans. How Orwellian can you get? When are they going to change the name of the UK back to Airstrip 1, like in 1984? Families suspected of cheating school catchment area rules have been followed by council spies. Civil liberties campaigners said this clearly was an abuse, and they were talking about the hugely controversial regulation of the Investigative Powers Act, that it was being abused, and I'm sure you have more to say on this.
Well, David, I was as shocked as you were when I read this, and I think anyone who now tries to claim we don't have a police state, or we live in a free society, really needs to take their head out of the sand. As soon as you give government, or in this case local councils, any sort of power, any further laws They hugely abuse it. This is just another case of terror laws which were brought in and people agreed to them because they thought they were going to be protecting us from being bombed or being shot. And now they're using them, as you read out, in such petty cases as people putting their rubbish bins out too early. And this is what we've got in. We've got all these employed, so many people in these councils to do nothing, that they now have to justify their jobs by doing these outrageous acts. And I just want to know how many sort of illegal databases are they secretly keeping with all this information on? How much do they know about us? I mean, this is just the stuff we know they do. And this is the stuff they will release under Freedom of Information requests. How much stuff is going on that we don't know about, where they're seriously spying on us?
Well, and I know I don't know if Freedom of Information requests work the same in the UK as the US, but I've seen them where they come with so many things redacted out that when you hold it up, it looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. I mean, so you really get sometimes hardly any information from Freedom of Information requests.
Yeah, it's a joke, and people ignore them whenever they want to, or pretend there's not stuff there. So really, it's a sop to freedom, but it's not really it's not really there at all. And as we see, they spy on us. It is 1984. It's here. It's happened.
And it seems like the society is going backwards. We're heading back toward the time when there needs to be a new Magna Carta. I mean, the government is no longer limited in any way, any substantial way of which I'm aware, either in the United States or in the United Kingdom, which totally violates the foundations of common law. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dutch socialists and their demand for a referendum on Europe. This is David Fincher. Well, we're back in our last segment, and time seems to always fly when Ollie and I get talking. Ollie, during the last segment, got a Twitter message. Why is this fella advocating freedom but broadcasting from Serbia? I served in Bosnia implementing Dayton. Serbia is not a free nation. Bad choice if he truly wants to make a statement. I'm sure he can do better than a quasi-fascist state run by gangsters who participated in ethnic cleansing. Just thought you might be interested in audience feedback. Well, I hope you're listening to me, you jerk. First of all, Serbia is not Bosnia. Second, if you were in Bosnia, you were there as a violating NATO's charter. Third, if you remember what was going on there was ethnic cleansing, as you call it, done on all sides. Serb churches and Serb communities were wiped out. I am an Eastern Orthodox Christian, but I'm a Christian, and I want to deal with the truth, not NATO lies. And frankly, I have more freedom on a day-to-day basis living here in Serbia than Ollie has in the United Kingdom or that anyone has in the United States. The government leaves me alone. The government here isn't great, but it's mostly just stupid and inefficient. You forget the attacks by the Muslims on Christians. You forget that the Croatians were allies of Adolf Hitler and the Ustashi during the Second World War. Read your history, read the Atlantic Charter, and then lecture me about Serbia. But first, figure out that Serbia and Bosnia are two different countries, because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. So that's my comment to that gentleman who responded on Twitter. Now, to move on, Dutch socialists demand referendum. The party leading the opinion polls ahead of next month's Dutch general election said on Thursday it would demand a referendum on the European fiscal compact, a core element in Europe's attempt to fix its debt crisis. And he said in a newspaper interview that any further transfers of sovereignty to the EU from the Netherlands would need to be ratified in a referendum. So, what about that?
Well, first, before I get into this, it is unlikely to happen because although they're leading in the polls, they'll have to form a coalition, and no other party is likely to agree to the referendum. If it does happen, it won't end the fiscal compact, which is basically requiring governments to run fiscal surpluses or have balanced budgets. But it does. I think it shows a very interesting development in Europe that not just the people of Europe, but now the politicians of European parties are getting fed up of the EU, and it's showing that it's popular now to really bash the European Union, and there is enough support across the EU, not just in Eurosceptic Britain, but the Dutch socialists, who you think would be great fans of the EU for the amount of regulation that it pumps out. So I think it's sort of showing the tide is turning against the EU. Before, people that it could rely on to support it are starting to get fed up with, as they see unlimited money transfers from north to south, no end to the sort of EU recessions. I mean, I think the statistics show there's another recession in the Eurozone about to happen, just judging by the statistics. So the tide is turning, and you can see the breakup of the EU could come a lot earlier than actually you expect, with the amount of people around Europe turning on it.
Well, I saw one poll where there's only one country. It's one of the Baltic states. I don't remember which one. There's only one country in which polls show the majority of people still support the EU.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Across Europe, there is dissatisfaction with it, as we've seen certainly in France and Holland before, when they rejected EU constitutions by referendums. People, when asked, do not want more Europe. People are generally politically apathetic most of the time, but when they actually have to think about it and hear the arguments, they don't want more Europe. They don't want more sovereignty passed away from them. I mean, this fiscal compact is a huge removal of national sovereignty, stopping countries setting their own budgets.
Well, what they're doing is they are putting into place what Meyer Amschel Rothschild said: give me control of the country's money, and I don't care who runs the government. That's what the EU's doing.
Absolutely. It's just another step, as everything the EU does is another step to sort of trying to make the whole of Europe have the same laws, so that you can move into one state, into Europa, as opposed to have the individual nations of Europe. And the people don't want it. As we see, the people, and now the politicians, the ones that actually have vested interests for this, because the EU throws money at them, they're starting not to want it. So the whole edifice is really coming down.
Well, all of these international organizations, including NATO, as I pointed out a minute ago, break their own rules anyway. I mean, they impose whatever is convenient at any time, and people are getting sick of it. They have to obey the laws, but the governments don't. And
absolutely. Well, if you let the government, when the government writes the laws, it's free to change it at whatever, or change its interpretation of it. And if you do that, then obviously you're committing a crime. But when the government does it, that's just the government's prerogative. So it's just disgusting, really.
Well, years ago, before you were politically aware for sure, I used to go, and when I did speeches, I'd ask people, what country is the greatest threat to your individual freedom? And everybody would say the Soviet Union. And I said, no, they're the second greatest threat. The greatest threat to your to your personal freedom is your own government, because they're the ones who really control you.
Absolutely, as we saw previously with the council spying case, the only the major country that can make any difference to your life is the own one. That's the one that you've got to treat with the most distrust and the most. You've got to question everything it does, because if you don't start questioning your own government, then they can do anything.
Right. Well, and the EU has had such an impressive record. I mean, let's go to Greece. Greece's Prime Minister, Antonis Samaras, is preparing for the first of a series of meetings in which he'll ask the country's lenders for more time to implement spending cuts and reforms. He's set to tell Eurogroup finance chief Jean-Claude Juncker that the country needs breathing space. Well, I don't know. It seems like they need time to put out the fires put by the rioters.
Absolutely. These, by all accounts, the more time it needs. This is political, not economic. The problem is Greece hasn't done the reforms it needs. Time will actually make things worse as the interest burden goes up. But as you pointed out, the implementation of these of the solutions, well, the Europe's supposed solutions, could not, might not even happen because the amount of social unrest in Greece is enormous. I reported last week about the rise of racism in Greece, because people really who can't find jobs because there are none, turning on immigrants, etc. The social unrest, the riots that happened there, is rising. It only can rise. I think Citibank has said that it can see Greece exiting the Eurozone by as early as September, October. There are so many hurdles that Greece has to jump, not the least that most of its parliamentarians might not even vote for the bailout packages, because they see the amount of hatred the Greeks have towards these basically imposed packages from Germany. I mean, you have Greeks on the street burning symbols of Angela Merkel in Nazi uniforms. It's throwing this European project is throwing Europe back to a time when we hated each other, to a time when we killed each other. It's not caused peace. It's not caused prosperity. The only things it's caused are division, are hatred, are economic ruin.
And could lead to war.
Oh, absolutely. You can't rule that out. You say that and people think it's ridiculous, but the last time Europe had this sort of economic mess, we did see a war. And there is nationalistic, I'm not talking about, sort of normal national, I'm talking extreme nationalistic hatred of others being stirred up precisely because of this European project, the taking away of sovereignty, the taking away of democracy, and the imposition. I mean, I don't blame, some people blame Germany for trying to impose this. I wouldn't blame the Germans. They're trying to get by. I mean, they're funding all these people. Blame the European presidents, these people that stick their head in the sand, that refuse to look for other options, that think the solution to a problem of Europe is more Europe.
Well, and unfortunately, what it seems to me is, I thought the age of colonialism was mostly dead. The only colonies that were left were places that wanted to stay colonies. I mean, I remember a few years ago, Suriname, which used to be Dutch Guyana, actually asked the Netherlands to be recolonized, and the Dutch were smart enough to say, not bloody likely. But now they're colonizing within Europe.
Absolutely. But Greece is now an economic protectorate. It has no freedom.
Right, and it's not going to get any better, and letting the Eurocrats run it is only going to make things worse. That's all the time we've got. Thank you, Ollie. Everybody, remember, you only have 3 choices. Give in and live like a serf, fight back until you can't stand it anymore, or get out and take your freedom with you. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio.